In January of 2007, the Virginia Department of Historic Resources conducted a reconnaissance-level survey of the Woolen Mills neighborhood in Charlottesville, Virginia.
A place in history. This weekend, residents of the Woolen Mills village await an architectural survey that will determine the historical significance of the area. NBC 29's David Douglas joins us live from Woolen Mills tonight. And if we can get David there. David, when does the survey start?
And Annie, and here's what will happen. Surveyors will spend several days taking photographs, drafting site plans, and mapping out the layout of some 50 structures. Structures like this old chapel here. And once complete, it could land the neighborhood on the Virginia Landmarks Register and the National Register of Historic Places, which those who live here hope will keep this neighborhood from being forgotten.
It's Saturday afternoon in Woolen Mills, a quiet community on Charlottesville's eastern edge, dating back nearly 200 years.
This neighborhood started back in the early 1800s down at where the Ravenna and Moores Creek run together.
Water powered a grist mill, and later on, ALBEMARLE's largest industry moved in, a factory making cloth for uniforms from around 1900 until it closed in 1964.
And all these people that lived in the neighborhood, in almost every house, someone worked in the mill.
That was then, this is now. While parts of the neighborhood are well preserved, others are falling apart. And the last thing residents here want is for anyone to mistake dilapidated for disposable.
Back in the old days, there were these people that worked 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, and their contribution to the state of Virginia has never really been recognized.
For that reason, residents are happy about the survey, but they know that being deemed historic could bring prestige and not necessarily protection.
With the National Register, all it is it's an honorary designation. You know, if I wanted to paint my house purple or tear off the front porch, I would still be, there's no restriction on that sort of thing.
Yet, they see being something better than becoming nothing at all.
If the neighborhood is placed on the historic registers, it could make residents who live here eligible for historic rehabilitation tax credit programs. Now, tomorrow night at 11, join us again from Woolen Mills for a second story on this hopefully historic community.
Okay, David Douglas live for us tonight. Thanks, David. Well, today's temperatures in central Virginia may not have been high enough to mean whether or not the Old Mill community can be deemed historic. But not all of the community lies inside the city, and not all of the zoning is the same. And that fact has several residents concerned. NBC 29's David Douglas joins us from Woolen Mills.
Annie, there are actually two parts to the Woolen Mills neighborhood. One part sits inside the city of Charlottesville and the other inside the county of Albemarle, like this old burned out power plant here that's grown over with vines. And this old building that's inside the county is zoned residential. But let me show you, just down the railroad tracks from that old power plant is this old house on the hill. It's actually the mill owner's house dating back into the 1900s. And believe it or not, it's zoned industrial inside of Albemarle County and has increasingly been surrounded by a number of light industrial buildings. Now here's how the current property manager says she first found out about this.
I came home from work one day and a pit was being dug next door, and they were putting a business, building a metal prefab building right on the property line, and I had no idea that could be done. I assumed the house was protected. I assumed we were zoned residential. Why would we be zoned anything else?
Now, coming up tonight at 11, we'll have more on the history of this old house on the hill. Plus, we'll talk about what might be done to preserve it for generations to come. That's all coming up tonight at 11. For now, in Woolen Mills, David Douglas, NBC 29 News.
David.
Annie, the house is a piece of history dating back to the days before the Civil War. A rare gem when it comes to houses, especially since this one is in remarkably good condition. But believe it or not, this house sits inside an industrial, not residential zone, which could mean destruction if something isn't done.
I came home from work one day and a pit was being dug next door, and they were putting a business, building a metal prefab building right on the property line, and I had no idea that could be done.
Victoria Dunham is the property manager for the Marchant house, an 1840s home once owned by the owner of Charlottesville's Woolen Mills.
So I called the county and I said, there's been a horrible mistake, and you need to do something about this. They're putting a building on the property line. And they said, well, no, that's okay, you're zoned industrial. And I said, well, no, of course we're not. You're looking at the wrong map.
But the county was right.
The city annexed part of the Woolen Mills and left some from the county and left some of the property behind. And this was one of the properties that was left behind.
That was back in the 1980s, as the Albemarle County Comprehensive Plan was being put together. With a mill already nearby, the land was zoned light industrial.
The county's intention was that the property would eventually be raised and metal industrial buildings would come up in its place.
Deanna Wilcoxson grew up in the house, which her family still owns.
Growing up, back here were woods that I used to play in with my friends, and I came back and was horrified to see all of these businesses around. I was not expecting that at all.
As industrial growth creeps up behind the house and around the house, one day it's not going to be habitable as a home.
Albemarle County Supervisor Sally Thomas says the county knows that historic sites matter to its citizens.
Well, you know, we just did an opinion survey not long ago, and it turns out that about 95% of our citizens think it's important for us to be preserving historic sites.
But this site, she says, creates a dilemma.
In this site, where you have both industrial site and historic sites, it will get some discussion because we don't have a surplus of industrial sites, but we also never can make again historic sites.
I feel that the county wants to do the right thing, and we have to help.
I love this house with all my heart and soul, and I will do anything to save it.
An architectural survey of the entire Woolen Mills community begins tomorrow. That survey will determine whether or not the area should be deemed historic, a designation Thomas says could help the county out when it comes to deciding what to do next.
Okay, David Douglas live for us tonight. Thanks, David. Well, traffic tie-ups in the 900 block of West Beverly
Resources started touring that area today. They're conducting an architectural survey to possibly qualify that region as historic. Residents are delighted their community may one day be on the National Register of Historic Places.
A bunch of interesting and wonderful things happened here, and I guess it's sort of that there was, you know, that history is very much a living thing, and you can find out about it, and just what's in the history books isn't necessarily, you know, all that there is.
More than 200 years ago, a grist mill and uniform factory stood on the land, and today there are still many historic pieces of architecture left. Well, today's cars are certainly safer, but
they said God made it so. Never a sparrow would fall from the sky, but that he would not know about. And that's a funny way to blame him. I love it when the plan works out. Love it when a plan works out. The road to hell always needs paving. Gotta make room for the rush. And whatever made that train leave the rails is the thing that we don't talk about. They said it could have been prevented. I love it when a plan works out. I love it when a plan